Well, 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 who do I find on my doorstep yet again? Come in, come in, you're getting soaked. I swear, it always seems to rain, but it never seems to flood. That's good, I suppose. My house is far from a pontoon boat, but it does seem to be a great place to sit and listen to great tales. So welcome, one and all, to Cozy Horror, with me, Dr. Plague. Let's get you settled in with a cup of hot tea and some great stories on today's episode. First and foremost, we'll be starting off with 4 pieces of short fiction by an unknown earther. They're not particularly long, but I like them, and they're very dear to me. It was a typical Friday evening for Chloe and her friends. They'd just finished watching a movie and decided to play hide-and-seek in Chloe's house. Chloe was it, and her friends scattered throughout the house to find hiding spots. Chloe searched the house from top to bottom, but she couldn't find her friends. She even searched the cellar, but it was empty. She was about to give up when she heard a faint whisper. It was coming from the corner of the cellar. Curious, Chloe walked towards the corner, but as she approached, the whispering stopped. She looked around, but nobody was there. Suddenly the lights went out, and Chloe was plunged into darkness. Panic set in as Chloe fumbled around for the light switch. Just as she found it, she heard a faint creaking noise. She turned around, and in the dim light, she saw a figure looming in front of her. It was tall and shadowy, with eyes that glowed red in the darkness. Chloe tried to scream, but no sound came out. She was frozen with fear as the figure began to move closer, step by step. Just as it was about to reach her, the lights flickered back on, and the figure disappeared. Shaken, Chloe stumbled upstairs and told her friends what had happened. They laughed it off, saying she was just imagining things. But Chloe knew what she'd seen. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. Over the next few weeks, strange things continued to happen in the house. Doors would open and close on their own, and Chloe could hear footsteps in the cellar, even when nobody was there. She started to feel like she was going crazy, and her friends started to distance themselves from her. One night, Chloe decided to confront her fear and go back into the cellar. As she descended the stairs, she felt a cold breeze brush past her, and she could see her breath in the air. The whispering started again, but this time it was louder and more incessant. Chloe followed the sound until she reached a dark corner of the cellar. As she peered into the darkness, she saw a pair of red eyes staring back at her. With a sudden burst of courage, she stepped towards them and reached out to touch. As her hands brushed against the eyes, she felt a cold, slimy hand wrap around her wrist. She screamed and tried to pull away, but the hand was too strong. The whispering grew louder and more intense, and Chloe felt like she was being pulled into the darkness. Just as she thought she was going to be dragged into the abyss, the lights flickered on again, and the hand released her. Chloe stumbled back, gasping for breath, and saw that the cellar was empty once again. From that day on, Chloe never went back into the cellar again. She moved out of the house soon after, but the memory of the cold, slimy hand and the glowing red eyes stayed with her forever. She still wonders what would have happened if the lights hadn't come back on. I can't remember when I started feeling like I was being watched, but it had been going on for weeks. Every time I turned around, I would see something moving out of the corner of my eye. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but as the days went on, I became more and more convinced that Something was following me. One night I woke up to a cold chill in the air. The bedroom window was open, even though I'd closed it before going to bed. As I sat up, I saw a figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was dark and shadowy, but I could feel its presence. I tried to scream, but my voice was caught in my throat. The figure began to move closer, its movements slow and deliberate. As it drew near, I could see that it was covered in blood. Its eyes were empty sockets, and its mouth was twisted into a grotesque smile. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. The figure reached out and touched my forehead, and suddenly, everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying in a pool of my own blood. The figure was nowhere to be seen, but I could feel its presence lingering in the room. I stumbled out of bed and ran to the bathroom, my heart pounding in my chest. As I looked in the mirror, I realized I wasn't alone. There were dozens of faces staring back at me, all twisted in agony. They seemed to be reaching out to me, as if begging for help. I tried to look away, but their eyes held me captive. In a panic, I ran out of the house and into the street, but no matter where I turned, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being followed. I could hear whispers and laughter coming from the shadows, but when I looked, there was no one there. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. The faces in the mirror became more and more real, until they were almost tangible. I could feel their breath on my skin, their fingers brushing against my hair. Then one night, I woke up to find myself standing in the middle of the street, covered in blood. I didn't know how I'd gotten there, or what had happened. But as I looked around, I could see dozens of faces staring back at me, their eyes empty, and their mouths twisted in agony. I knew then that I was haunted, and that there was no escape. The faces would follow me wherever I went, and I would be trapped in this nightmare forever. As Maya stumbled through the forest, the darkness enveloped her like a suffocating cloak. The trees swayed and groaned in the howling wind, and the rustling of leaves was the only sound to be heard. She had taken a shortcut to get back to her campsite, but now she had lost her bearings and didn't know which way to go. Suddenly she heard a faint whisper in the darkness, like a voice from the other side. Maya's heart began to race as she tried to pinpoint the source of the sound, but there was no one there, only the trees and the wind. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. Maya could make out the words now, but they didn't make any sense. They were like fragments of a language she had never heard before, twisted, distorted. Then she saw them, a pair of eyes glowing in the darkness like twin flames. They were fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Maya tried to run, but her feet wouldn't obey her. She was frozen in place, like a rabbit caught in a hunter's trap. The eyes drew closer, and Maya could see they belonged to a figure, tall and lean, with sharp claws and teeth like knives. It moved with a grace that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. Maya knew without a doubt she was face to face with a monster. The creature lunged at her, its claws tearing at her flesh. Maya screamed, but the sound was drowned out by her own heartbeat. She fought back with all her might, but the monster was too strong, too fast. Just when she thought it was all over, the creature stopped, as if it had lost interest. It turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving Maya alone and bleeding in the middle of the forest. Days later, Maya was found by a group of hikers, barely alive. She was taken to the hospital, where she underwent multiple surgeries to repair the damage done to her body. Even as she recovered physically, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She began to hear whispers in the darkness, the same twisted language that the monster had spoken. She saw the glowing eyes in her dreams, and sometimes, even when she was awake, she knew that the monster was still out there, waiting for her. Maya tried to convince herself that it was all in her head, that the trauma had caused her mind to play tricks on her. But deep down, she knew that the monster was real. One day, she would have to face it again. It was supposed to be a fun birthday party, but something felt off from the very beginning. The decorations were all in place, the balloons and streamers creating a festive atmosphere. But there was a definite sense of unease. As the guests arrived, they too felt the strangeness of the party. The music was too loud, the laughter too forced, and there was someone missing, the birthday girl herself. As the hours passed, the guests began to notice strange occurrences. Objects moving on their own, doors slamming shut, whispers in the dark corners of the room. They brushed it off as their imagination, but the unease continued to grow. Suddenly the lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. Panic set in as the guests fumbled for their phones, trying to find some source of light. And then they heard it, the sound of someone or something moving in the darkness. The guests huddled together, their hearts racing as they tried to make sense of what was happening. Then a voice spoke up out of the darkness, a voice that belonged to no one in the room. "Happy birthday," it said, the words dripping with malice. The guests screamed and ran for the door, but it wouldn't budge. They were trapped. The voice continued to taunt them, and they could hear the sound of footsteps getting closer and closer. Suddenly the lights came back on. The room was empty, except for a birthday cake, with a strange candle flickering on top. The guests breathed a sigh of relief, thinking it was all just a prank. Then they noticed something strange about the cake. The icing spelled out a message reading, "You're next." As they turned to leave, they saw her, the birthday girl, standing in the corner with a look of pure terror on her face. She'd been missing all night. Now she was here, but she was different somehow. She had a dark, otherworldly aura about her. The guests knew that they had to leave, but the door still wouldn't open. As they huddled together, trying to find a way out, they heard the sound of scratching at the door and a low growl that made their blood run cold. They were trapped with whatever horror had taken over the birthday girl, and they knew that their chances of survival were slim. The birthday party had turned into a nightmare, and there was no escape. Haven't heard that one in a while. It's certainly great to hear it back in the lineup. I wonder whatever happened to an AnnexectedEarther. Maybe I'll look them up and see what they're getting up to these days. This next story comes to us from Stephen Stroemenger, and it's about one of the world's oldest professions, though maybe not the one you're thinking. Doesn't it say in the Bible that by the time there were 4 people, one of them decided that was too many, and where there's dead, there'll always be the gravekeeper. Nathaniel's fingers trembled as his callous hands gripped the shovel handle. Its rusty edge plunged into the earth beneath him. The graveyard was bathed in an eerie fog. An orange glow from the gas lamp cast long, twisted shadows along the cast-iron gates and the cracked headstones. He tried not to look at the name etched into the gravestone below him. Eliza Wilkins, beloved wife. It had been 5 years since she passed, leaving him a widower at the tender age of 32. The pain still felt like a gaping, open wound. In her absence, addiction had taken hold. Nathaniel wished he'd been a stronger man, but the stable reflection of his past had shattered soon after his beloved's death. His money dried up, along with any job prospects in this forsaken town. Nathaniel had resorted to robbing the graves of the wealthy, prying jewelry from brittle dead hands and selling it to those who would buy it in the seedy underbelly of this town. At first, he wasn't caught up in a moral dilemma, robbing only the most nefarious dead: corrupt politicians, crime bosses, other known deviants. But those plots had long since been cleaned out. The black markets didn't pay what his plunder was worth, nor did it cover the expenses of his living and his ever-growing addiction. Now his shovel scraped against the hollowed ground where his beloved Eliza rested. "Forgive me," he whispered, as he took a swig from his flask and dove the blade of his shovel into the soil. To both his relief and his dismay, the earth was softer than he expected. With haste, he uncovered the top of the casket. It sat, staring at him in the moonlight. The orange glow of the gas lamps flickered off of it and shimmered in the pools of tears that welled in his eyes. Warm streaks formed on his dirt-covered cheeks. The casket lid creaked open with an ominous, rusty groan. Nathaniel's heart pounded, dreading yet yearning to see her face one more time. To his surprise, she was far more intact than he would have ever imagined. What he thought would have been the skeletal remains of his wife's corpse were instead much more preserved, still decayed and mangled from the passage of time, but still very much intact as well. Again, he quenched his thirst from the flask. More tears streamed down his cheeks as he reached down to remove Eliza's wedding ring. The ring he'd bought in what felt like a different life. Something began to move underneath her burial dress. Startled, he pulled his hand back, ready to strike whatever creature emerged from the fabric. A low, gurgling moan left Eliza's lips, and her milky, accusing eyes shot open. Maggots squirmed from the cavities on her face, and her jaw creaked open as her moaning intensified. She sat up and began to twist and contort. Then he heard flesh tearing and saw a gush of black fluid pour from the bottom of her dress. Some abominable spawn slithered from Eliza. It convulsed and unfurled in a burst of grotesque afterbirth. This thing was both human and insectile. It held the shape of an infant, but had more blinking eyes covering the front of its face. Thin, wiggling tendrils fell from its mucousy orifice of a mouth and flopped against the wood of the casket like a fish out of water. Coarse hair, still covered in the vile afterbirth, wiggled and shifted on its skin. All of its eyes darted in different directions, frantically seeming to search for something unseen. Its darting eyes stopped and locked onto Nathaniel all at once. His mouth agape in horror, quickly filled with several writhing tendrils that fell from the mouth of the infant creature. An intense breath left him as the memories of his past grave desecrations came rushing back in kaleidoscopic shards. Tendrils went deeper into him. For a brief moment, the creature was beautiful. It was as if he was seeing visions from beyond the veil of mortality, projected by an eldritch being plucked from the most unimaginable abyss. Everything went black. Then again, he was shown a flowing collage of his past defilements, of sacred resting places. Each one of his memories came back all at once, as if he were looking through the many eyes of the creature itself. Nathaniel thought the creature was a blasphemy against the cycle of life and death, as were his many misdeeds. A profound disgust churned within him as he finally understood the full consequences of his actions. He had exploited the hallowed ground for its resources. Each tombstone marked a lifetime of experience, personality, and memories that he had sullied. These resting places were meant to guide those who passed through the ether like the setting sun or the changing of the seasons. What Nathaniel had done was an affront to nature itself, an insult to the natural order of life and death. Guilt washed over him as he realized the torment of the restless spirits he had left in his wake. The tormented souls he'd disturbed were now bound to the mortal plane, lingering, restless. Something snapped inside him. The visions in Nathaniel's mind froze and then shattered like stained glass windows being pelted by stones. He felt the twitching tendrils slide from his throat and out his mouth. As his sight returned, Nathaniel saw finger-sized larvae emerging from the dirt around him. Fat, bloated grubs. They were covered in a green, glowing mucus that mingled with the light of his gas lamp. Eliza was still moaning loudly, and the creature that came from her seemed to be gasping for air. Many more larvae began to fall from the dirt walls all around him, piling in and all around the casket. They reeked of decay, and Nathaniel almost choked on his vomit. He watched in revulsion and fascination as they began to burrow into Eliza. They became a blanket of undulating flesh, writhing in the gloom of the moonlight and the gas lamps, and soon they would be upon him. Nathaniel quickly grabbed onto the dangling roots and used protruding stones as footholds as he climbed from the grave. Some of the larvae had attached themselves to his dirt-covered pants, and he flailed his legs violently as he pulled himself out of the hole. Horror gripped him, but he also battled with the lingering guilt of the visions he had been shown. More warm, salty paths appeared on his grime-covered cheeks as he scrambled to his feet. He looked back and saw Eliza peeking over the edge of her grave, covered in a wriggling blanket of glowing grubs. She screamed, and Nathaniel started to run. He fled blindly into the night, Eliza's voice echoing through the graveyard, and the shrieks of the spirits he had disturbed reverberated through his mind. He ran until he could run no longer, finally collapsing by a gnarled oak tree in a park on the outskirts of town. Huddled beneath the twisted branches, he wept. The sun's first rays came over the horizon, and the warm light hit his face. His nightmare of an evening had come to an end. The cycle of night and day continued. Rays of sun shot between the planks of a small fence on the perimeter of the park. They made straight lines of light on the grass around him. Then he realized time moves just like the light, in a straight line. He couldn't change the things that he had done, but Nathaniel knew what he must do. He would become a gravekeeper and work to restore and maintain the sacred spaces he had desecrated. The branches of the oak tree in front of him swayed in the morning breeze. He reached out and touched the tree's trunk. In death, all things reunite as equals under the bark of mortality's great tree. Each branch a life, each leaf a soul. Moving on to another great contributor to the channel, we hear a tale by Subaruglian. Staying in the graveyard for this one, let's hear a tale about a graveside disturbance. Since people seem to enjoy my last creepy tale from Appalachia, I'll start writing the rest down while I've still got some breath in my lungs. When we were kids, my older brother and I used to play army out in the woods, deep in the hollers and on the ridge tops of the South Appalachians, in western North Carolina. We built all kinds of foxholes and forts and walls and trails and everything in between. You name it, our imagination could frame it out and build it up. We never felt uncomfortable, never felt watched or even kind of uneasy, until one late fall weekend where the leaves were starting to let go, but still crunched beneath your feet just before the snow came down. We had marched a mile or so back through the old logging trails, grown up so thick you could scarcely get a grown man through in some spots. We found a perfect spot to start the next fort. It was flat, no trees, about 50 feet, both long and wide. Plenty of leaves covering it meant a good raking of them up into piles at the clearing's edge would make for impenetrable walls for our imaginary attackers. We set to work with only our feet and our hands, as we hadn't grabbed our father's tools that day to clear the leaves from the clearing. We set about piling them up as best we could along the edges. We decided we needed a foxhole to hide in, directly in the center of the clearing. As we redistributed more and more of the leaves, we discovered 9 large and oddly shaped rocks that formed a neat circle in the center of the clearing. We didn't pay much attention to the discovery at the time and diligently worked at our task at hand. It started to get late, and we could hear our mother whistling loudly through the autumn forest for us to come home. We relented and decided to grab a rake, mattock, and a shovel the next time we were out, so as to build our impregnable fortress the best as possible. As we walked home, the forest came alive with all manner of nocturnal critters. Coyotes yipped and barked, bobwhites cooed, owls screeched and hooted. It was relaxing, and the air was warm, but only just in our faces. My brother and I laid our plans out for the next day to build our ultimate fortress. We went so far as to draw up a rudimentary blueprint, complete with the large rocks that occupied the newly found fortress site. As we looked closer at the blueprints, we realized that the rocks had formed a circle. Perfect. We would be able to fence it in and build the foxhole right in the center. We ate our dinner, not speaking a word of our plan to our parents, and took an early leave for bed. We awoke early in the morning, before our parents, and went to grab all of Dad's tools we would need for the day. The air was so much cooler this morning than the last, and slightly breezy, with an overcast sky keeping the warmth of the sun out. We donned our coats and hunting orange beanies so as to be safe in the woods during hunting season, per our parents' instructions, and set off. As we walked, my brother and I noted the eerie silence, but chalked it up to the cool and windy weather. The only wildlife we observed were a few ravens that seemed to observe us as we walked. never flying away as we approached, but rather watching us from the tall trees. As we trekked our way back the mile or so into the wilderness, we talked excitedly about the fort we were going to build. We alluded as to how our older cousins would be jealous when they came to check it out. As we came upon the site, I noticed an eerie feeling of unease, like we were trespassing, and someone, or something, didn't want us to be there. I thought nothing of it, as we set about raking the leaves into a wall. After an hour or so, all the leaves had been raked out of the clearing and into the edges, forming a neatly stacked little border wall. All the while, my uneasy feeling of some sort of transgression never really ended. My brother took notice and asked me teasingly, "What's wrong with you? You afraid of the woods, you little girl?" And I laughed, but I replied, "It feels weird out here, like we're not supposed to be here." He called out some names and told me that he would protect me from anything out in the woods that came to get me, in true older brother fashion. This didn't put my uneasiness at rest, but I lied and told him that he'd made me feel a little better by saying it. The time had come to start our foxhole in the center of the clearing within the rock circle. We started with the mattock, breaking up the ground and pulverizing the tiny rocks as we broke through the long, undisturbed surface of red clay that is so common throughout the southern Appalachians. The deeper we gouged into the earth, the worse my feeling of uneasiness grew, until it was pure dread. I had been shoveling out the dirt as my brother broke it up, and I stopped. He sank the mattock into the earth a few more times, and as he looked at me, seeming to ask why I had stopped, he brought the tool down one more time with a resounding clunk. He had struck something. Before either of us could exchange questions, I forgot my feeling of dread and began shoveling again, feverishly this time, to see what we had hit. Maybe it was treasure. Maybe it was a meteorite or something cool. As I brought the dirt out of the hole and onto the surface, it became clear what we had struck. Stained red by decades of subterranean existence in the ferocious clay was a human skull with a large chunk taken out by the mattock. We stepped back in absolute horror, all excitement and happiness drained from our demeanor. I, being 8 years old, screamed and began to cry. It felt like we had killed this person ourselves. It felt like we had stashed the bodies here and prayed not to get caught. My stomach churned, and I vomited my breakfast onto the clearing floor. As we reeled from the revelation, the very atmosphere around us seemed to grow cold and unfriendly, like we had disturbed something unnatural. We stood in the silence for what seemed like eternity, as the wind shifted the tree branches around us. I heard what I thought was our mother whistling for us to come home. My brother heard it as well, and we both lit out for the house, not wanting to spend any more time in the presence of whatever we had exhumed. As we walked back through the woods at a much quicker pace than we had entered, the claustrophobic trail seemed to get even more tight in places. At times, they almost seemed unfamiliar. It was like the forest itself was trying to keep us from getting back to the safety of our home. We finally burst through the trailhead, tools in hand, just as a bolt of lightning split the sky, arcing down in all directions like nature itself had become infuriated by our actions. We walked inside after putting the tools away, just as the downpour started. I called for our mother throughout the house, but there was no answer. We walked around towards the carport and saw that Dad's car was gone. Though it was before the golden age of cell phones, my father was provided a company phone that he always kept on him, so we picked up the landline and dialed him. Mom picked up the phone, much to our relief. They had stepped out to get pizza and a movie from Flick Video because they didn't want to cook tonight. For a brief few hours, we forgot about the terror of the day. For the most part, there was still a gnawing, biting feeling in my stomach as we sat and watched the movie Mom and Dad had rented. As it grew nearer to bedtime, the feeling of dread returned, growing stronger all the time. I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned for hours until I eventually found a comfortable enough position to drift off. I began to dream that I was once again on the trail to the clearing, only this time the sun was not out, but the orangish-yellow glow of the harvest moon lit the entire path like a giant lantern in the sky. There were no stars, only the moonlight emanating from the blackness of the night sky. As I walked, my feet made no sound, even when stepping on dried-out twigs or leaves. This had to be a dream. yet it felt so real and lucid. I walked almost as if my body was controlled by someone else down the path to the clearing. As I drew nearer and nearer to the site where we had unearthed that strange and unmarked grave, I began to notice a pale glow coming from the clearing. Upon approaching the area, I noticed something that I won't soon forget, though it's been 20 years since I've seen it. The origin of that pale glow was a hunched-over, wrinkled, gaunt woman. Her jet-black hair hung in very thin wisps off her head. Her lips seemed to have dried up and decayed off her thin and leathery face a long time ago. She was stark naked, covered in a fox fur, the glowing fungi that is found throughout Appalachia. She was sobbing and mourning softly as I kept my distance and observed her. I inched closer to see if I could figure out what she was hunched over, and when I did, a twig snapped underfoot. Time stood still. My heart raced and my skin began to sweat in the split second that it took for the sound wave to reach that ghastly-looking woman. Her gaze immediately snapped in my direction with an unnatural speed and at all the wrong moments for any human on this plane of existence. Her piercing eyes were further apart than a human being's should be and devoid of pupils. Her nose was bulbous and hung off her face like a diseased zucchini squash. Whatever the hell this was, it was no longer a person, if ever it had been. Her eyes immediately locked with mine, and I knew I was caught. She screamed an evil shriek, shrill and terrible. I immediately wheeled around and began to run, but to no avail. I only gained about 4 steps before I felt a grab and a mighty pull on my ankle. I was mid-step, my leg in mid-air, and I met the earth with a hard smack. When I regained consciousness a few minutes later, I was being dragged across the forest floor towards the clearing by this woman-like monstrosity that stood a full head and shoulders above any man. I was too dazed and confused to scream, and I could only watch in horror as this thing dragged me across the forest floor towards the center of the stone circle. Perched upon the 9 stones were the very ravens which my brother and I had seen in the daylight. Their beady eyes focused on mine, cawing and cackling as I was thrown into the circle of stones. I looked up into the face of the thing that had dragged me to where I lay, and as I did so, she burst forth with the most shrill and evil cackling I had ever heard. It filled the airways and resonated within the very earth upon which I lay. Her gnarled and cavity-riddled teeth jutted haphazardly from her overly large mouth at different angles of varying degrees of sharpness. Her black, diseased tongue licked what remained of her putrid lips as she cast her gaze downward at my helpless body. The ravens began to caw in rhythm as she reached out towards me with long fingers that terminated in sharp, dagger-like nails that were more akin to claws than fingernails. The cawing quickened as she made contact with my chest. I felt the nails sink into my skin as I screamed out in pain, still unable to move. The cawing grew louder and faster, drowning out my screams, just as she began to grip my chest to rip through into my body. A light split the sky then, so bright that, for a moment, all I could see was the white. The woman screeched a blood-curdling shriek. Then, the light was suddenly gone. When my vision returned, the woman was gone. The ravens were gone, the graves were covered over, and there stood my brother in the midst of a frigid downpour, with shovel in hand. Not a word was exchanged, but we both knew what we had just witnessed. He pulled me up from the ground, and we headed for the trail towards the house. The rain slacked and stopped as soon as we were out of sight of the clearing, and the stars finally came out. The moon was just coming up. Its pale, soft, white glow lit our hike back through the hills and hollers. We walked into the basement instead of the main entrance, so as not to wake up our parents. We shed our rain-soaked clothes, and as I took my shirt off, I noticed 5 deep punctures that had scabbed over. My brother dressed the wound as we both exchanged glances, and I slept in his bed that night, even though we were past the age of this being acceptable. We never told our parents of the event. We never spoke of it again. I did some research years later and discovered the story of an older woman who'd been accused of 9 counts of witchery in the 1700s in the fort where my hometown lies. As such, she was burned in the square where the old fort was located. To this day, on autumn nights, from the safety of our parents' back porch, you can still hear an old woman cackling on cool autumn breezes, and the screams of a dying young child led astray by the most evil thing I'd ever encountered. Looks like we're coming to the end now. But don't worry, I've got something special for the last two stories. It's a series that I've always had kind of a love-hate relationship with, but I really like this particular retelling. Brought to us by the very talented Lockhart1220, I bring you Spiral, a retelling of the Jeff the Killer story. Enjoy. This behavior is unacceptable, Mrs. Woods, declared the high school principal, sitting behind his large desk as the two parents sat before him. One was Margaret Woods, the mother of Jeffrey Woods. Beside her sat another disgruntled parent, casting side glances over at Margaret with crossed arms. The principal continued his announcement. Your son got into an altercation with Mrs. Knowles' son, Alan. Margaret was displeased with her son's behavior, though she knew that the boy had trouble expressing anger to a reasonable degree, oftentimes ending up in verbal fights, but this was too far. He attacked my baby boy, sir, said Mrs. Knowles. He came home with bruises all over his face. She described the state of her son, but Margaret intervened. Your son probably started the fight. Jeff would never hurt anyone, so he was probably acting in self-defense. She defended her son, not knowing the full story of what had truly happened, but the principal brought them up to speed. Ma'am, security footage and student accounts say that Jeff started the altercation. Margaret lowered her head in embarrassment as Miss Knowles held a soft grin across her face, knowing she was in the right and could get something out of this to make up for damages. Jeff started the fight by shouting at Alan, which led to shoving and punching. Two custodians had to pull them apart. The principal continued to explain what happened in the school halls, but he wasn't blaming Margaret entirely, trying to think of a solution to this little problem. I'm sorry, sir, and I'm sorry about Alan, but is there any way we could just forget about this? Jeff is a good kid, and I'm sure he's going to talk to me about all of this. She expressed her anger towards her son getting into this situation, but there wasn't much they could do. I want Jeff suspended from school. I don't care for how long, but long enough, Miss Knowles declared. That, or I'll take legal action. There's evidence that he attacked my son, so you'd just be fighting an uphill battle. She kept that smug smirk across her face, knowing her entitlement and victim status would give her some kind of benefit, either wanting the school to be safe once again for her baby boy, or to milk every penny out of Margaret's already struggling family. The principal interjected. All I can do, ma'am, is suspend Jeff for a week. He turned towards Margaret, leaning against the large desk to show her just how serious this matter was. Unless you'd like to take this to court, Mrs. Knowles. That would just be stupid. Margaret knew she was in the wrong here. Fighting this court case would lead her to nowhere, so she settled for the easy option. Just take Jeff out of school completely. Margaret waved her hand, wishing to be done, which surprised both occupants in the room. Really? The principal asked, to make sure he had heard this right. Yes, just take him off the register. I'll talk to my husband more about this, but we won't be coming back. The principal agreed and made things a lot easier on his part, though Mrs. Knowles was somewhat unhappy. If I ever see your son near mine, she trailed off on some kind of legal speech, but Margaret didn't care much, since she knew that they wouldn't stick around for long. Margaret's husband, Peter, had been given a job opportunity elsewhere, but they never looked at the time, since they assumed they'd be staying here for longer. She supposed that was at an end now. This whole situation was never really solved. The damage was already done, and their reputation was pretty much down the drain. So maybe things would be better off if they just picked up and moved, starting fresh. Better yet, it might keep Jeff under control. The 17-year-old Jeff sat in his bedroom, having not attended school due to his little outburst, laying on his creaky old mattress as his eyes trailed out the window, watching the day pass him by. There wasn't much for him to do anyway, as they didn't own a TV, or even a proper phone to watch videos on. No, Jeff and his family owned a cheap flip phone, just for convenience sake, since they were usually around one another more often than not, so calling or texting wasn't really a necessity, just a small luxury when they needed it. Their home also didn't have much to do in either, maybe a radio lying around, but Jeff didn't feel like listening to music at the moment, more focused on the world just being the glass of his window. It showed a small neighborhood that he was very familiar with, as he and his little brother Lou would oftentimes play in the street or explore the surrounding scenery to see what they could get up to. Granted, the neighborhood wasn't a very good one, having some troubled kids and even adults every now and again, but that just added to the fun. Exciting chases down the street, hiding in the woods to avoid confrontation from local crackheads, or even getting into some trouble with the other kids who were also bored out of their minds. The community was flawed, but it taught the two boys valuable lessons, teaching them more than school ever could. The sounds of Jeff's mother pulling into the small driveway caught his attention, and he rolled over onto his stomach to see the state of his mother as she prepared to come and see him. Margaret turned off her old car and pulled out the keys, grabbing her thighs before exiting the vehicle, pulling the front seat forward to allow Lou to crawl out, having taken him out of school early for convenience sake. To him, Lou looked extremely young, being only 15, but he could easily be mistaken for much younger, a sort of baby face, though his attitude didn't match. Jeff looked his age, maybe even older, due to the way he dressed, with oversized shirts and baggy pants. Even his wild brown hair that he usually left unkempt added to the image. Lou, despite looking younger, dressed for his age, wearing things with more colors, as his older brother preferred clothes on a black to white scale. Margaret entered the old house and set her things on the kitchen table, making her way to Jeff's room, knocking on his door before swiftly entering. Do you know how embarrassing that was? She jumped straight into it. I mean, they both knew what had happened, so there was very little need for introduction. Jeff had sat up in his bed and looked at his mother while she spoke, having some respect for her, but not a lot, since the two usually bickered and argued every once in a while, though he certainly didn't hate her for it. Please, just tell me why you attacked that boy like that. Really, tell me. Margaret tried to get an immediate answer out of Jeff, just to try and understand what initiated the fight, but Jeff answered with a shrug. I'm not really sure. I mean, he was talking about Lou, and I kind of just got a bit irrational. But that wasn't a good enough answer for Margaret. Tell me, Jeff, please. She crossed her arms over her chest, not believing that that was the whole truth. Jeff, however, really didn't have any more to confess to. That's really it, Ma. The bruise on the side of his face was really the only memento he'd taken from the fight. It was a small one, but a sore one at that. Alan, on the other hand, had suffered a bit worse, but not too much. Bruises across his face, a swollen lip, and Jeff had maybe even drew some blood from the kid's nose. Overall, he didn't break anything, though. Margaret huffed, trying to understand the reasoning behind Jeff's actions. It seemed so minuscule, it almost sounded ridiculous in the grand scheme of things. But Jeff was always a complicated kid. Without another word, she turned and left, deciding to ask again later in hopes of getting more out of the story. In the meantime, she'd try to plan out what they were going to do. With Jeff taken out of school and her husband's job opportunity someplace else, she was debating on them moving and starting anew. Jeff had a moment of silence before it was broken by the soft knock of his little brother, leaning against the door with a concerned look on his face. You okay? Lou asked, noticing Jeff's strange behavior. Jeff let out a soft chuckle and waved away his brother's curiosity. Yeah, just a bit guilty, you know. Guilty? Lou asked, stepping into the room and was soon instructed to close the door so their mother couldn't hear. A little, yeah. That kid just started talking shit, saying how they'd do something to you to make me mad. I don't know. I really don't remember most of it, just because the heat of the moment, you know? A nervous laugh left Jeff's mouth as Lou chuckled. So you beat up a kid for me. How nice, Lou joked. He had meant to lighten the mood, and it seemed to have worked. Jeff and Lou had this brotherly relationship of trust, willing to tell one another things they would never tell their parents, mostly secrets or opinions they had about people. They truly felt safer together, even after moments like this, where Jeff had physically attacked another kid for basically nothing. Lou knew it was probably something deeper, though, but would let Jeff explain when he was ready. They wouldn't shut up about you at school today. Alan didn't even show up. It was kind of weird. Lou sat beside him on the bed, Jeff allowing this, never having a problem with sharing his things with his brother. I bet. I beat the crap out of that guy. I don't know if you were there to see it. Were you? Jeff asked as Lou shook his head. Good. I basically had him pinned to the ground, punching him over and over, Jeff explained as he demonstrating it by holding his hand down and pinning someone there, throwing light punches down into an invisible victim. Lou wrinkled his nose, waving it off as he pushed Jeff's shoulder to make him stop pretending to fight. I didn't need you to explain. I know you could do some damage, believe me. Lou rolled his eyes, remembering the small moments the two brothers had argued. It would never escalate to full-out fights, but simply wrestling in the backyard to let off steam and calm their nerves. And every time, Jeff would win. Lou always believed he won because he was older, or maybe the fact that Lou would just let Jeff win due to his stubbornness. Either way, Lou knew that Jeff was capable of things, but only to a certain extent. What else happened today? Jeff asked to change the topic, not wanting to dwell on the fight that had happened yesterday. Not much, just work and lessons. You didn't miss much. Lou then snapped his fingers as if remembering something. Oh, Mom took you out of school. Like, completely. Jeff tilted his head to the side, looking somewhat surprised and somewhat happy. On the one hand, no school, and with him being a senior, it just meant less work for him. Way less work. On the other hand, he wouldn't complete his last year of school, so all his work would be for nothing. Not that he had much to lose, since he was an average student, passing with the bare minimum. He wasn't stupid, though. Really, why? I mean, I know why, but what's going to happen? Jeff asked, adding on soon after, I mean, am I being shipped away? Shit, Lou, I might be going to the coal mines, he laughed. Even Lou chuckled a little at that. You wouldn't last a day in a mine. Or maybe you would, I guess. You surprise me sometimes. Lou shook his head in disbelief. Who knows? I might be the leader of the dwarves, Jeff said, nudging his brother, who continued to laugh at his little joke. The two continued to banter after a long day apart, really being an inseparable duo. Even when their father came home from work, the two never left one another's side, only doing so hours later when their parents joined them at the dinner table. They sat around the small square table, eating a quick meal that Margaret had put together in her trusty microwave, the parents addressing the situation of their future. Boys, started his father, your mother and I have been talking, and we're thinking about moving. Jeff nearly choked on his food as Lou set his silverware down to listen to what they had to say. Where was this going? Move? Are you crazy? Jeff said. Listen, Jeff, since your mother pulled you out of school and Alan's parents aren't too happy with your outburst, we just thought it'd be easier to pick up and start new somewhere else. His father took a bite of the dinner, mostly giving them time to process the situation, and from the looks of things, the two boys were unhappy. I was offered a job a few towns over, and I think we can get a house there, but I need you two to be on board. We need your help packing up for travel. He tried to make it seem as though it was a fun adventure, but Jeff immediately hated the idea. Dad, we grew up here. You can't expect us to just move like that. Like, can't I just go to school somewhere else around here? He tried to reason, and even Lou chimed in. I don't want to move either. We've got friends here. They didn't want to go and leave the place behind, but it was really out of their control. I'm sorry, but I think it'll be a new opportunity for you two. Margaret glanced over at Jeff, who now barely touched his food, too angry to think about eating. So it's all my fault. Yeah, I admit, I'm in the wrong for doing what I did at school, but this is completely unreasonable. Jeff admitted his wrongs in hope his parents would change their minds, but it was more than just that. True, it was mostly due to what had happened, but there were other circumstances here. The new job would pay more and would allow Margaret to be a stay-at-home mom. It was also nice to change the scenery a little if they could find a good, cheap home. Also, a chance to meet some new people. Jeff, Lou, just give it a shot, his father tried to coax them, which was working on Lou, but Jeff was more reluctant. With a sigh, Margaret ended their touchy conversation. Well, think about it, okay? Just give it some thought. Dinner resumed, but Jeff excused himself, wanting to be alone to process this new information. Lou was conflicted, too, with emotions about the whole ordeal, but willing to give it a shot. He was more of a pushover, but that was for good reason. He was only 15, after all, and there really wasn't much he could do about it. So why would he fight for something he knew he'd lose? Jeff, however, was stubborn. Way too stubborn. But in the following days, he gave in to the idea of moving. His mother and father searched the area for a new home to buy, or maybe even rent, but didn't seem to have any real luck. Lou continued to attend school for the following weeks, but was eventually taken out to help the family pack and prepare for their new lives. Jeff expressed his anger over the situation by making life difficult for his parents. Even Lou would play along if it was a game, though eventually their home was completely packed up and ready to be relocated. They didn't have anywhere to go yet, though. Peter had to travel over there for a couple of days to buy their new house, leaving Margaret, Jeff, and Lou alone to fend for themselves in a box-filled house, just until things were ready to be brought over, though. Finally, though, after about 3 weeks of waiting, Peter said it was all ready to move in, and they started hauling their stuff to the new house. The house was smaller than their last one, but it sat snug in the middle of a cul-de-sac, with houses on either side of them. The houses themselves looked rough, some with barred windows and even junk in the front yard, but it wasn't anything new that the family hadn't seen. It was just a bit worrisome, due to their lack of knowledge about the area. Jeff and Lou explored the new house, realizing that they had to share a bedroom, but they didn't really mind. Dividing the room in two, they made things work. Lou hung a few posters of shows he enjoyed on his side of the room, alongside paintings and older school projects that he couldn't stand to get rid of due to nostalgia. Jeff, on the other hand, had a few posters of bands that he liked and a few family photos from when he was younger. Other than that, the room looked well lived in already. Definitely a boy's room if he'd ever seen one, but one the two liked a lot and could definitely get used to. The two helped their parents as much as they could, but they mostly just carried the boxes inside and let their mother and father set everything up, unsure where most of the stuff was going to go anyway. The first night in a new house is always the strangest, feeling as though you're somewhere you're not supposed to be. But then again, this was their home. Lou crashed out once his head hit the pillow, sprawling out in his bed, thankful not to be a snore. But Jeff was different. Jeff had been having trouble sleeping the past few nights, having the same dream that freaked him out time after time, though not by much. It was simply the dream, after all. Jeff would envision himself someplace familiar, but different all at the same time, as if the scenario was made up of unfinished brushstrokes that changed the more he looked at it. Maybe it was his old house, or the school he attended, or maybe the streets he used to roam. Either way, he felt similar, while also being completely new. The world wasn't the only thing Jeff found strange. No, he wasn't alone in this world. He was accompanied by a humanoid figure who matched the scene around him, familiar, yet strange, voice ever changing, to people he once knew, and people he'd never met before. The person would say things like, "You know me," or "Remember," but most of the time Jeff would ignore it. Until tonight. "You liked hurting me, didn't you, Jeff?" the person asked, which startled Jeff in his dream, but he didn't wake. "What?" "Alan, you liked putting him down, punching me. Did it give you some kind of power to hurt?" The person called themselves Alan, but that was anything other. "No, well, kind of, but you or he shouldn't have said that crap." Jeff defended his thoughts, but the person continued. "You kinda liked it. Jeff, you can't deny this." Jeff shook his head, trying to walk away from the shifting person, but his efforts were fruitless. With every step he took, he seemed to go nowhere, unable to put distance between himself and this thing before him. "You want to hurt someone, to feel that rush again, don't you?" The person tilted their head, watching as Jeff grew visibly angry, annoyed by this dream and all of those like it on the previous nights. Why was he dreaming this? What was the meaning? He didn't know, but all he knew was whatever happened in the dream stayed in the dream. So he turned to face the person, raising his fist to attempt to punch, but right as his hand would have made contact, he woke up. The dream world faded to black as his eyes slowly opened, watching through blurry vision, his brother getting ready for the day. Lou sat on the edge of the bed, pulling on the same worn-out sneakers, shaking his brown hair from his face, trying his best not to wake up his older brother. Jeff grumbled as his hand was brought up to rub his face, shifting in his bed to sit and greet his brother. "Morning," he groaned in a tired tone, his clothes wrinkled by his tossing and turning, and his hair was a complete mess. Lou smiled. "Morning, bro." He stood up once his shoes were tied. "I was going to go see what's around here if you want to join me." He was curious about the neighborhood and if there was anything fun to do. Jeff clicked his tongue, glancing up at his brother as though in answer. "Sure, let me just get ready." Lou nodded. Yeah, I'll wait outside. Also, tell Mom and Dad." Lou took his leave and allowed Jeff his privacy to get ready. Jeff stumbled out of bed over to the small dresser where he had put most of his clothes. But what should he wear? Black or gray or something with white writing? Maybe something a little more adventurous, a white shirt even. Choices, but eventually he settled on a gray shirt and black baggy jeans, which looked quite worn out. Pulling on a belt and slipping into his old shoes, he was ready for a walk around the neighborhood, after brushing his hair out with his fingers and brushing his teeth. Passing by the unopened box and junk lying around, he made his way outside to see his brother waiting on the porch. So were his mother and father. His parents were enjoying a cup of coffee on the front porch since the weather was nice, and they needed the fresh air after dealing with so many dusty old knickknacks. "Dad, is it okay if Jeff and I walk around?" Lou asked his father, who agreed with a soft hum and a nod, knowing the two were responsible enough not to get in trouble. At least, Lou was. Jeff was more of a wild card, especially after what had happened at the old school. The brothers jumped off the porch steps and started their walk across the yard when they stopped to the sound of a woman calling out. "Good morning," she called, maybe a woman in her mid-40s or so, waving at them with a kind smile. Lou waved back as Jeff gave her a forced smile of acknowledgement, but didn't want to engage in conversation. His parents, however, had that covered. "Good morning," called his mother, and before they knew it, they were being pulled into a conversation with the stranger. "You guys just move in?" the woman asked, stepping closer so she wouldn't need to yell across the yard. "Yes, we're still unpacking," Margaret laughed with a smile. Peter listened in, and Jeff and Lou stood around. "Where are you guys coming from?" the lady asked. "I'm Kelly, by the way." She introduced herself, seeming to be quite friendly. His mother stood, dusting herself off. "I'm Margaret. This is my husband Peter, and those are my two boys, Jeff and Lou." She pointed towards the two teens, who just wanted to go, but stayed nonetheless. "We just came here from a few towns over. Nothing new to us." She laughed, as Kelly did too. "Really? Well, welcome to the neighborhood," she announced, wanting to give a warm welcome to the family. "Thank you," Peter chimed in, walking over to join his wife. "How long have you lived here?" "Oh, longer than I could count," Kelly said, waving a hand dismissively. "Oh, by the way, I'm hosting a block party here. Not this Wednesday, but next Wednesday. It's a free-for-all. You guys should come get yourself a plate." His parents were warming to Kelly, seeming to feel included, thinking the move might have been the right choice. Jeff and Lou still seemed on the fence about the whole idea, but they didn't have much of a choice, so they played along, taking their leave to continue their adventure throughout the neighborhood. The sounds of laughs and friendly words faded away the further they walked down the street, side by side, as the wind blew past them. "Seems like they're already blending in," Lou said, filling the comfortable silence, looking back at their parents, who continued to talk to the neighbor. "I guess, but free food is free food," Jeff said with a shrug, looking around at the other older houses, finding some rough-looking dogs behind rickety fences that looked like they could collapse any minute. Free food and entertainment. Who knows, there's probably some kids around our age next door. Maybe some girls, Lou teased as Jeff rolled his eyes. "Lou, that dog over there has a better chance of getting a date than you do," he said, pointing to a toothless bulldog who laid in some guy's overgrown lawn. Lou pouted, pushing Jeff with his shoulder. Jeff stumbled a little, but got back on track. "I'm kidding. Well, maybe not," he continued to tease, as Lou went quiet, not out of anger, but slight embarrassment. The neighborhood wasn't that bad, having the same broken-down look, but was divided by busy roads, which the two didn't cross. Not today, at least. On the way back, though, they came across a small group of kids playing basketball in the street, making quite a lot of noise by dribbling the ball and yelling at one another. Jeff and Lou, of course, watched as they walked past, just seeing what kind of games they were playing, since a competitive game was unlikely due to there only being 3 people. They had probably been staring a bit too long, as one of the kids passed the big orange ball over to them, which Jeff grabbed out of reaction. "Go on, shoot," said the kid who'd passed it, looking to be around the same age as Jeff. Jeff sighed in annoyance, but decided to humor him, tossing the ball with one hand and completely missing the basket. The kids laughed at this, even Lou, who mumbled, "Nice shot." But these kids weren't all that friendly. "Good shot, lazy eye," called one of the kids, which Jeff didn't find amusing. "What'd you call me?" Jeff stepped off the sidewalk to confront him. "Whoa, whoa, Tiger, calm down," the ball-passing kid teased. "No, I want to know. What did he call me?" Jeff motioned towards the name-calling kid, who only laughed at Jeff's reaction. "First of all, his name is Troy." Troy was a smaller kid, looking to be about 10 or 12, but he was around 16 years old, actually. "Second of all, don't be coming up here yelling like that. You just look stupid," the kid pointed out, which only angered Jeff more. He didn't like looking like an idiot in front of people, or to be treated this way. "I'm not stupid," Jeff growled, feeling Lou trying to pull him away. "Come on, Jeff, let's just get out of here." "Huh, Jeff. Stupid name, too. Maybe I'll just call you Jeffrey." "No, Jeffy," the kid mocked, only making Jeff angrier by the second. "Don't call me that," Jeff hissed, pulling away from Lou to stand face to face with the kid. "Say it, don't spray it, Jeffy, and it's Randy you're talking to." Randy introduced himself as he wiped spit from his cheek from Jeff's shout. Randy and Troy, so far, were on Jeff's shit list, people to watch out for, but what about the third kid who stood and watched? The third kid seemed to enjoy the show so far, being a bigger kid, both in height and weight, so it was safe to assume that this guy was part of their little gang. "I don't give a crap who I'm talking to. You just don't say that kind of thing to me, okay?" Jeff set his hands on Randy's chest, pushing him back a bit to show he was serious. "Oh, Mr. Tough Guy here doesn't like to be called Jeffy. Hear that, Keith?" Randy called over his shoulder to the bigger boy, who stepped forward to assert dominance with his bigger size, willing to beat Jeff down if he had to. "Jeff, please, just drop it," Lou begged, attempting to drag Jeff away once again. But Jeff finally allowed this to happen, stumbling away as his eyes were glued to the trio of bullies. This clearly wasn't over. The two brothers made their way back home, a slow walk as Jeff needed time to calm down. Lou frowned as he worried about his older brother, but what could he really do? "Jeff, we don't need to tell Mom and Dad. I don't want them to worry," he reassured, not being one to tattle. I mean, he did trust Jeff more than his parents, so why would he tell on him about something irrelevant like that? "But promise me you won't do that again, please. You know I hate seeing you get yelled at by Mom, you know?" Lou tried to reason with him, but Jeff didn't say a word. Jeff kept his head down, hands shoved in his front pockets as he listened to what Lou had to say. He wasn't ignoring him, but he just didn't know what to say that would calm Lou's nerves. And it was actually the truth, not a lie. Lou sighed in annoyance, waving his hands in dismissal. "Whatever then, get your ass beat." Lou didn't mean it. He just was a little bit mad with the way Jeff was acting. The two arrived back home from their walk. Jeff took off to his room to be alone, leaving Lou to entertain himself. For the remainder of the day, Jeff just stayed in his bedroom, only coming out to eat and use the bathroom, just needing some time alone. Lou respected that. When night fell, Lou had crawled into his bed and crashed out, just like the previous night. But Jeff stayed awake. What Randy had said struck him, and the thought of being weaker than some kid who was no older than him made him furious. But there was nothing else he could do but sleep, so he did. Back to his reoccurring world of familiarity, he found that person again, but this time they were more hostile. "Come on, Jeff, what's wrong?" the shifting voice of the familiar stranger echoed. "You ain't got the guts to hurt me?" It was daring Jeff to do something more. Jeff took this opportunity to let off some of his anger, attacking the person with kicks and punches, going wild at whatever he could get his fists on. But the taunting words were never ending. "Weak. Hurt me. Hit me harder, Jeff," it called over and over, and Jeff responded with more violence. The world around him started to get dark. Not exactly night just yet, more so evening. When morning came, he woke up before Lou, still feeling somewhat emotionally drained, even after that violent dream he had had. Days went on, and Jeff was still in his mood, something that worried his brother and his parents, though his mother and father had more important matters to take care of, mostly with work and enrolling the two in school. If Lou tried to talk to Jeff to figure out what was going on, his efforts were useless because of his stubborn brother. What was Jeff supposed to say? "I have dreams about hurting people," or "I want to seriously hurt someone"? No, he couldn't confess to that, not just yet, not even to his brother, whom he trusted. Things were only going to get worse once school started. Two started their first day well, introducing themselves to the other students and teachers. Lou even found himself a small group of friends, but that couldn't be said for Jeff. The school day went on as you'd expect. Nothing much happening. Not until they were released. Jeff met up with Lou in front of the school, bags swinging off their shoulders, as Lou held a big smile across his face. "Hey, bro, you doing okay?" Jeff nodded. "Yeah, bit better. I'm gonna walk home alone if that's okay with you." Jeff wanted to make sure that Lou was fine enough to walk home on his own. Lou responded, "I mean, I could walk alone, but are you sure? Jeff, you've been acting super strange. Strange, maybe try psychotic. Running off of barely any sleep or food, all by choice, and when Jeff did sleep, it always seemed to be that familiar dream. He just wasn't in the right mind to joke with his younger brother. Not today. Maybe not for a while. I'm fine, Lou. Look, when I get home, we could do something together, if that makes you happy," he offered, which Lou reluctantly agreed to. "Fine, just please be safe." Lou waved as he walked off, leaving Jeff to his own devices. Jeff took a deep breath, needing to console himself, and trying to understand what was happening, or how he could fix the problem. He started his walk down the sidewalk, passing a few houses and hills, though Jeff didn't take time to appreciate the scenery, or what was left of it. More so, losing it to his mind. "Hey, Jeffy," a voice called behind him. Crap. Jeff turned his head to look, surprised to see Keith instead of Randy. He just assumed Randy would be the only one who'd call him Jeffy, but he guessed not, as his friends were starting to use that name too. "Get lost," Jeff growled, lowering his head to avoid confrontation. But that didn't seem to work as Keith caught up with him. "Nah," Keith said with a laugh, glaring down at Jeff. "I didn't know you went to this school. Lucky us. Randy goes here too, and Troy too," he informed, much to Jeff's dislike. "Speaking of them, I didn't like how you talked to them before," he smirked. "They're my friends, and friends stand up for one another. I didn't get to before, just because you're, stupid little brother," he insulted Lou, catching Jeff's attention because of it. "But now I can." Keith reached out to grab Jeff's shirt, tossing the boy to the ground with ease. Jeff let out a groan of pain, his arms scratched along the hard pavement. It didn't hurt too much, but Jeff wasn't going to leave this alone. "You take that back," he growled, struggling to get to his feet due to the heavy backpack, whimpering as Keith kicked him down again, his shoes making contact with Jeff's hip. "Or what? What's your skinny ass going to do to me?" Keith laughed, feeling unstoppable because of his size difference. Keith was built like a tank, tall and wide with the strength of 10 men, while Jeff was running off an energy bar and 4 hours of sleep. But Jeff wasn't going to go down without a fight. With a burst of adrenaline, he slipped out from the straps of his backpack, stumbling to his feet as he turned back to Keith, trying to find any opportunity he could to hit this son of a bitch. Rushing forward, Jeff struck the man's chest, attempting to hit his head, but was constantly blocked by Keith's arms, getting punched back in the process. Bruises would cover Jeff's body after the tussle, mostly around his arms or chest region, but also along his face, having been struck there a few times. He wasn't giving up easily, though. A swift kick knocked Jeff back off the sidewalk, feeling the uneven grass behind him as if they were fighting beside a small ditch. Maybe he could use that to his advantage. Jeff seized the opportunity to grab Keith by the jacket, pulling back to put him off balance, causing him to fall and tumble into the ditch. It didn't hurt Keith, but it allowed Jeff to get on top of the bigger kid, holding Keith's neck as he punched down over and over again. Anger overtook Jeff, that rush of power filling his head as he got hit too much to handle, too much to rationally handle the situation, and before he knew it, Jeff had both hands on Keith's throat. Squeezing tight, Jeff watched the bully struggle underneath him, the terror in his eyes as they realized that Jeff wasn't playing. Keith kicked his feet and attempted to call out for help, only to let out soft gurgles and cries as Jeff pushed his thumbs deeper into his skin. Good stuff, but we're not quite done yet. Let's trip right over into part 2, which I'm sure you'll enjoy just as much as I do. Jeff would have killed Keith if it hadn't been for that one final punch across the face, knocking him off and allowing Keith to crawl away. Keith dragged himself to his feet and gasped for air, running away as soon as he could, wanting to get away from the crazy man as soon as possible. Jeff, on the other hand, lay in the grass, feeling a hot liquid run across his lips and stain the grass under him. Was he bleeding? Touching his lips, he pulled his hand away to see the blood on his fingers. This sight sent shivers down Jeff's spine as he realized what had happened. He tried to murder someone. Picking himself up off the grass, he quickly grabbed his bag and made his way home. Half of his face felt numb as blood dripped onto his favorite shirt. Walking had also become a chore for him, but he pushed through. He wanted to cry, to ease the pain somewhat, but he wouldn't do that in public. Crying in public made him feel weak. Eventually, Jeff made it home, being greeted by his father, who immediately noticed the state of him. "What happened?" Peter asked, freaking out and grabbing his son's shoulder as he pulled him into the kitchen to wash his face. "Keith," Jeff mumbled, following his father over to the sink as he bent over the counter, allowing his father to splash water on his face and clean away the blood. "Who's Keith? Is that some kind of kid at school? Did you get into another fight?" Peter rambled on and on, just trying to get answers, but stopped as Jeff started to cry. Jeff sobbed into the sink, the pain catching up with him and the guilt of disobeying his parents by getting into a fight. Peter didn't even know how to react to such a sight, stepping away from his son so he could get something cold to hold against Jeff's bruised face. "I'll tell your mother about this when she gets home. You're not in trouble, just don't be stupid next time." His dad didn't have the heart to yell at Jeff for this, especially when he stood there crying. Jeff nodded, taking the ice pack from his dad and making his way to the shared room to ease away the pain. As he entered, he found Lou reading a book that he himself had found interesting just a few days ago, being halfway done, but he was quickly interrupted by Jeff's arrival. "Jeff," Lou said, jumping to his feet, helping him sit down on the bed, sitting beside him as he attempted to comfort him. The bad thing about sharing a room was having the inability to hide things like this, exposing Lou to his vulnerable side, which was out of control. It was Keith. Jeff repeated the name, but Lou immediately knew what had happened. "Keith, son of a bitch. Why did he do this?" Lou asked in soft tones, rubbing Jeff's back to calm him down, which seemed to work. "He just came up and said we had some unfinished business. Then he knocked me down and did this." Jeff wasn't going to admit everything, worried that his attempted murder would scare Lou or pressure Lou to tell the authorities, like his parents or some kind of therapist. Lou couldn't believe that someone would just do this to his brother, even to the point of making him cry. Jeff never cried, or when he did, he'd hide away so nobody would know it. He would never cry in front of anyone, not like this. This must be serious, a horrible pain that he had endured. Pressing the small ice pack to his cheek, Jeff wiped his tears with the collar of his shirt, calming himself down to not worry Lou. "Did he start the fight?" Lou asked, wanting to confirm that this was some kind of self-defense and not Jeff losing his temper like last time. "Yeah," Jeff said, his voice having failed him the first time he tried to replying louder, which resulted in him raising his voice like this. Lou patted Jeff's back, frowning deeply. "It's okay, we'll just stay away from them, to avoid this from happening again." That helped some, but the pain still pulsed through his body. His head even started to hurt due to the crying. "Okay," Jeff sniffled, pushing himself to his feet so he could take his leave of the room, to clean up his face a little, so there wouldn't be any blood staining his skin. His mother didn't talk to Jeff when she came home, first being worried about his physical state, but once she realized he was fine, she went on and on about how he should have just let things go. Jeff had his pride to uphold, his dominance and power, but being in a new town like this, he was a nobody. So far, he could even be considered a weakling due to his involvement with these bullies, but his dream told him otherwise. The same power as before, but it was getting darker as the unfinished sun was starting to set beyond the horizon. Even the person grew more violent, louder, maybe symbolic of Jeff's increasing anger. Or was it more? Maybe the embodiment of his insanity. It was hard to tell, but what Jeff knew was this thing wanted to see his inevitable downfall, a spiral of mental deterioration, which Jeff had already been a part of after moving here. Wednesday soon came around. Not just any Wednesday, but the block party that Kelly had mentioned before on their first day here. Of course, the party had started after Jeff and Lou's day at school, so they couldn't miss it on their walk back home. A grill was fired up to cook simple hamburgers and hot dogs, even some chicken, though not much. Bottles of soda and lemonade sat across folded-out tables. There was even a cooler of canned beer for the adults. Peter and Margaret were already mingling with the other parents in the area, as the kids of all ages hung around those whom they wanted to play with. It was quite the loud party already. Lou first informed his parents of their arrival from school before grabbing himself a plate of food, Jeff following close behind, but staying quiet. Music filled the air as old hip-hop played through the speakers, just creating a wholesome mood and filling up the awkward silence. Jeff grabbed a burger, dressing it with tomatoes and ketchup and lettuce. He took a seat on the porch steps of the house, not wanting to meet anybody after moving, just wanting to be alone, but still outside so his mother wouldn't pester him about being rude. Though, being the odd one out might have turned out to be the worst decision of his life. Two familiar skaters were approaching him up the busy cul-de-sac, spotting him almost immediately. Turning their boards in his direction and turning down the road, Jeff took note of what was about to come. "Jeffy!" called Randy, as Troy followed close behind him. Jeff's heart sank, turning his attention to the floor so he wouldn't acknowledge their presence, but that didn't seem to stop them. "Come on, Jeffy! Not even a hello anymore?" Randy purred, plopping down beside Jeff, skateboard resting against his leg as Troy stood close by, not having much to say, but there to protect Randy if a fight were to break out. "Go away," Jeff grumbled, messing with the bread on his burger while the plate sat along his lap. Randy shook his head, leaning against Jeff's side, getting more than a little personal. "No, I don't think I will. You know, heard about what you did to Keith." That name rang through Jeff's ears. He just wanted to forget what had happened in the first place. "Honestly, I don't believe it." Randy leaned closer to Jeff, who turned his head away, not giving him the satisfaction of looking at him. Randy huffed, quick to knock the paper plate out of his lap, sending the food flying into the yard. "Look at me, you little bitch," growled Randy, finally getting Jeff's attention as he glared back at him. "What do you even want?" "I ain't doing nothing," Jeff shot back, catching the ear of a few of the neighbors who glanced over to see what was going on. They assumed it was just a small bicker between rivals. "Ain't doing nothing. That's right. You are doing nothing. You're letting me yell at you, treat you like crap, and you ain't doing a thing about it," Randy pointed out, just trying to get under Jeff's skin, to see if he had did to Keith what he had said he did. Did Jeff really try to murder one of his friends? He had brought Troy around for backup, of course, just in case the rumors turned out to be true. Jeff wanted to beat the living daylights out of the kid, but decided not to, especially in front of so many neighbors and his parents. So Jeff stood and attempted to walk away. Then maybe Randy would leave him alone, right? Wrong. Randy quickly followed, leaving his skateboard leaning against the porch as he walked behind Jeff. "Now you can't even talk to me. Come on, where's the killer in you?" Randy challenged. "Keith said you had the killer in your eyes. I don't see it. All I see is a little pansy." Jeff tried to ignore the kid, but his words infected his mind, replaying over and over to remind him of what he had done and what he wanted to do. Randy pushed Jeff from behind, making him stumble, but not fall. "Fight me, pussy," Randy dared bluntly, telling Jeff what he wanted. He wanted to fight. He wanted to humiliate Jeff even more, but Jeff couldn't ignore it. He had to stand up for himself, so he turned to face Randy head on. A few teens watched on in interest, even Lou, who immediately ran off to get his parents to help break up the fight. Jeff swung at Randy but missed him entirely as Randy leaned back, landing his fist against Jeff's guts, laughing all the while. "Come on, hit me," Randy cursed, but was soon hit across the jaw by Jeff. There was no going back now as the two swung and punched, lefts and rights, even resorting to kicking. Troy cheered on his friend as the other parents attempted to break up the fight, but to no avail as the two kept at it. The fight didn't even stay in one spot. Nah, the two shuffled around and put some distance between them every now and again, eventually standing beside the hot grill and table of burger toppings. Jeff scanned the area for anything he could use to fight with, blood boiling through his body, as all he could do was try to win at all costs. He grabbed a knife, The knife that had previously been used to cut tomatoes and onions, the juice of which was still on the blade. But Jeff didn't care as he swung in Randy's direction. Surprised, Randy tried to stay out of the way of the knife while also continuing the fight, but it was proving difficult, having been sliced at a few different times. Parents watched in horror as two 17-year-olds fought to the death, calling out for them to stop and even calling the police. Jeff couldn't think anymore, feeling as though the world around him was fading away as his worst enemy stood before him, bleeding, though not by much. That was until Jeff plunged the knife into his side. Shocked, Randy had stepped away to cover his wound, shaking as blood dripped between his fingers. That glint of killer instinct sparkled behind Jeff's eyes, confirming the rumors to be true. Keith wasn't lying, it seemed. In a desperate attempt to save himself, Randy grabbed the first thing he could find, which was a bottle of lighter fluid, and was quick to spray it at Jeff, who was unable to dodge the flammable chemicals. The liquid coated Jeff's clothes, standing in a small puddle of it, but before Jeff could react appropriately, Randy had tipped over the still-hot grill. Granted, the hot metal burned Randy's hands, but it was just enough for the burning coals to fall along the flammable liquid, casting Jeff alight in flames. Screams echoed through the neighborhood as Jeff tried to pat out the flames that covered him, even falling back against the hard pavement in an attempt to roll them out. Jeff had only been alight for a moment, as one of the parents put him out with a fire extinguisher, but it was just long enough to do some real damage. The fight had broken up. The adults were tending to both kids and attempting to keep them alive, hearing sirens in the distance. Randy wasn't faring too well, as the deep gash along his side wouldn't stop bleeding, making a mess all over the pavement. Jeff, dizzy from pain, lay motionless in the street as his parents tried to comfort him to keep his attention, but that didn't last long. Jeff couldn't take the pain anymore and had passed out due to shock, still alive, though barely, accepting death if it were to come, but was undoubtedly lucky. Police and paramedics rushed onto the scene, taking away both kids as they were brought to the hospital, which was a ways away. Jeff was lucky to be alive, being given his own room at the hospital to recover while most of his body was wrapped in bandages. His arms and most of his legs were neatly wrapped, the patches decorating his chest under the gown he was given, but his face was completely covered. The only thing left unwrapped were his eyes and his mouth, while part of his hair stuck out. His once brown hair was now a darker brown color, not so much black, but close. His eyes were more sunken in as the skin across his lips looked charred, heavily damaged by the heat. What the doctors couldn't fix was Jeff's broken mind, as in his unconscious state he was plunged into nightmares. That same reoccurring dream haunted him, but now it was night, and the person who used to mock him now lay dead along the painted floors. That didn't stop the voices from echoing through his head, now sounding like 10 or even 20 people whispering insults and threats down at him, completely breaking him in two. Jeff didn't spend long in his dream state, though. It had felt like an eternity to him, but he eventually woke up to find his family around him. Lou stood beside the adjustable hospital bed, while his parents sat on either side on the two padded chairs, immediately standing once Jeff started to stir. "He's waking up," Lou announced. "Hey, boy," his dad said, coming down to the dizzy patient below. "Mom, Dad, Lou," Jeff called out in a softer tone, licking his lips in an attempt to get rid of the chapped feeling, but it wouldn't go away. "We're here, Jeffrey. Don't worry. How are you feeling?" his mother asked, reaching down into the bed to find Jeff's burned hand, gently holding it in her own to comfort him. "I'm okay, I think," Jeff mumbled, unsure if it was true or not. Physically, no. Mentally, absolutely not. But he wasn't going to worry his family about it. Rather, he reassured them that he was going to be all right. "Why'd you do that?" his dad asked impolitely as he was nudged by his mother, but the question was already out. "Why?" Jeff tried to remember why. I mean, It was clear to anyone that he did it out of annoyance because of the kid's constant insults, but Jeff thought it could have been more. Maybe he just wanted to hurt someone, to hurt anyone. Maybe he was overthinking things, twisting the events in his mind to justify the stabbing. Is he alive? Jeff asked, completely forgetting the question that had been asked. The family looked away, unsure if they even wanted to answer it. Would it be a touchy subject, they wondered? He's dead, Jeff assumed bluntly. Not even a change in his tone to show sympathy or fear, just pointed out the facts as they were obvious to him. Yeah, he died on the way to the hospital, Lou confirmed, believing that he shouldn't lie to his brother, much to his parents' dislike. But it's not your fault. You were acting in self-defense. That's what we told the police when they arrived. You're fine, Lou explained, feeling the glare of his mother, but he ignored it. Oh, Jeff hummed, looking at the blank wall across the room instead, realizing now that he successfully murdered someone, another person. It's one thing to do it in a dream, but in real life, it was horrible. Jeff had shut down after his realization, refusing to speak any further to his family, even Lou, who continued to comfort him. Lou was worried about his brother, but there wasn't much he could do. The family eventually left, and Jeff needed to stay at the hospital for a couple of days to monitor his process of healing, as his burns needed a lot of attention, or if there was maybe some internal damage left unseen. Every day after school, Lou would visit. Lou would catch a ride with a friend to drop him off there and check himself in to see his brother before waiting to be picked up by his dad, who worked about 10 minutes from the hospital. His parents only visited twice, but Jeff didn't mind. He would much rather have been alone anyway, to fully understand what he'd done. So when the day came for them to remove the bandages, his family came to watch the procedure and also pick him up afterwards so that he could go home and act like it never happened. He's going to be okay, right? Lou asked the doctor, who was getting ready to snip the bandages. Yes, he's been showing no signs of pain or discomfort, so we believe he's healthy enough to return home, the doctor reassured, which helped the nervous family. Starting with the small wraps along his arms and legs, showing the burnt skin underneath. The patches on his chest were then removed, showing more of the horrible burned state, but then it came time to work on the face. Slowly, the bandages were unwrapped, showing Jeff's hair, which was now a darker brown color from its lighter shade, and was now thinner with small bald spots here and there, leaving his hair uneven. Then his face was revealed to his parents, who winced quietly at the sight. They did their best not to worry him or act like they hated him, but the sight was just horrible. Jeff's skin was a bit pale from his days without sun, and the burns that scattered along his rough skin, his sunken eyes, his lack of lips almost made him look skeletal. "How do I look?" Jeff asked, first looking up at the doctor, who smiled, and then over to his parents, who held forced smiles across their faces. "Better than most. Consider yourself lucky, Mr. Woods," the doctor spoke with optimism, but Jeff didn't care about others who may have it worse. He only cared about himself and what he looked like. "Let's get you out of this bed, and when you're ready," the doctor glanced over towards the parents, waving for them to come over. "A word, please, while he gets ready." They asked as the family agreed and followed them out of the room. "Will he be okay, ma'am? Like, really?" asked his father, who was concerned about Jeff's new look. "Yes, he'll be okay, but if he ever feels any pain or discomfort, here." The doctor pushed through her pocket to retrieve a small note. "Here's a doctor's note for some pain relievers and a number for a therapist, if he needs it. Knowing patients who undergo extreme pain, it could make them act differently, so this should help provide a safe outlet for him to express his emotions," the doctor explained, giving his father a note and holding out the prescription information, also the number for the therapist. "Thank you, ma'am." His mother bowed her head, thankful for all the help they had been given, but now the three of them waited on Jeff. His mother had left a change of clothes for him on the small cushioned chair by the bed, something comfortable for the cold night just outside. He was given a black shirt and a white pullover hoodie, paired with some black jeans and his usual worn sneakers, an outfit that Jeff found he didn't mind. Once dressed, he made his way out of the room, almost scaring his mother in the process, almost screaming if she wasn't informed by Lou, who eagerly awaited his brother's arrival. "Looking nice, bro," Lou smiled, offering a compliment in an attempt to lighten the mood, to make Jeff feel better about his appearance, which worked a little. "Thanks," Jeff laughed softly, more so a huff of air leaving his mouth rather than a laugh. But Lou thought of it all the same. "Y'all hungry for some pizza?" his dad announced, planning to stop by the pizza shop on the way back home for a quick meal. It was dinner time after all, and the two brothers seemed happy about that. With that, they checked out of the hospital and made their way back home. Jeff and Lou sat in the back of his father's truck, the seat in front smushing his long legs, but he'd grown used to such a tight space over the years of riding in the vehicle. As promised, his dad stopped for pizza, rushing in to grab a box or two to feed the family and believing that they could eat what was left over the following day. But that was just a waste. After dinner was bought, the drive home was silent, almost tense due to the awkward atmosphere. Pulling into the driveway of their home felt weird for Jeff, remembering the day he murdered someone here, and he himself had been burned alive. Brushing his fingers over his cheeks, he tried to push that memory aside, to focus on the task at hand, to get inside and devour some pizza. Pulling the front seat forward, Jeff and Lou crawled out, fixing their clothes as Jeff took a moment to look across the street. There was nothing there. Not even Jeff knew what he was looking at. Maybe the memory of what had happened here. Lou assumed as much. "Come on, bro. Let's get inside." He set his hand on Jeff's shoulder, guiding him inside. Margaret set the pizza down on the kitchen counter, grabbing a few plates for herself and her family. "Get what you want," she called, but Jeff had other plans. "I'll get some later, Mom," he said softly, pushing past Lou so he could enter the bathroom, finally wanting to see his face. The sight stunned him, viewing the dead skin and peeling scabs, the thinning hair. He looked hideous, an abomination, but he felt as though he deserved it. No, he deserved more than this. Burning his entire body wasn't a decent enough punishment for what he had done. For God's sakes, he had murdered someone, let alone a kid just like him. So this just wasn't enough. More needed to be done before he could truly forgive himself for what he had done. "Jeffrey," called his mother, pulling Jeff from his thoughts. "Yeah," he shouted back. "You need to eat something," his mother said, expressing her concern about Jeffrey's skinny frame and more so his health in general, believing he needed to be fed breakfast, lunch, and dinner to make up for his injuries. "I'll get some in a minute," Jeff groaned, not feeling in the mood to eat, but he couldn't keep staring at himself, or else he'd start thinking of things he shouldn't. Leaving the bathroom, he passed by Lou, who carried a plate to their room, always a bed eater even at a young age. The comfortable environment while eating a delicious meal would always make Lou feel safe or content, so tonight wasn't any different. Jeff watched his parents eat together at the kitchen table, smiling when their son entered the room, a forced smile that Jeff could see through. He didn't pay them any mind and simply filled a plate with pizza, only grabbing 2 slices before joining Lou to eat in the room. Their room looked so weird to Jeff as his side was left untouched, maybe clean of dirty clothes he had left on the ground. But other than that, it was left the same as it had been the week before. Lou's half had a few new additions, mostly drawings or photos of friends he'd made at school, being quite sociable, more sociable than Jeff ever was. Sitting on his bed, Jeff felt sick just looking at the food. "Do you want this?" Jeff asked. Lou, who sat cross-legged on his bed, pizza hanging out of his mouth, said, No thanks." Lou waved his hand, wiping away any sauce left on the corner of his mouth. "I'm not going to eat this." Jeff sat down the plate, which worried Lou somewhat. "I'll take 1 slice from you, but you have to eat the other." He knew Jeff needed to eat, and even if it was just 1 bite, it was 1 more bite than nothing. Fine, Jeff groaned as he took one of the slices, forcing himself to bite into the cheesy dough, his stomach already churning at the thought of eating this entire slice. But he pushed through it to make Lou happy. As Lou promised, he took the second slice, eating it alongside the other two that he had picked up already. Nothing else much happened that night. Maybe a few check-ins from Mom and Dad, but other than that, the two sat in bed with barely any conversation between them. Eventually, Lou turned over to get some sleep, leaving Jeff alone with his thoughts. All night long, it was only 1 a.m. when he decided to go to the bathroom, wanting to see himself one last time. Jeff carefully exited the bathroom, trying not to wake his sleeping brother or his tired parents, not wanting to get caught with what he was about to do. As he mentioned before, burning just wasn't enough of a punishment for Jeff. There needed to be more. That's what Jeff believed, at least. So with the bathroom door open and the light pouring into the slim hallway, Jeff started to look for something to satisfy his need for proper punishment. Then he found the box of razors. The brothers had their own shaving tools, which included extra razor blades to replace the dull ones every now and again. But Jeff wasn't planning to shave his face. No, he was planning to cut into his face with sharp blades. Opening his mouth, he grasped the blade between his fingers, pushing the sharp edge into the corner of his mouth, pushing it into his skin as he sliced his cheek. Tears coated his eyes, dripping down his burned face as he intentionally let out soft cries and whimpers, blood dripping everywhere as it would more than likely stain the countertops, more so the white hoodie he wore. His vision was blurred from the tears, annoying him more than anything, unable to see the damage he was causing until he pulled the razor away and wiped his tears. The cut looked like a lopsided grin, something Jeff wasn't going for, but went with anyway. Before he could do the other side, he had to deal with his vision. He leaned over the counter to be as close as he could to the mirror with his shaky hands. He pulled out his eyelids, cutting them off. He stomped his foot along the tiled floor, letting out quiet screams as tears and blood dripped from his eyes. Even wiping them away didn't help, but now he could see what he was doing, without interruptions. Finally, he started working on the other side of his mouth, screaming as he pushed the blade into his skin, curving the blade upward to make an asymmetric pattern across his face. He was soon interrupted by his mother, who stood by the doorway, a hand covering her mouth as though she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Her son was mutilating his face. And for what? Jeff stared over at her, blood dripping from his mouth, his tears freely running down his face. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," Jeff muttered, feeling harsh shock of pain run through his body as he opened his mouth to speak. Margaret, who hadn't moved from her spot, tried to think of how to react, but seeing Jeff in pain broke her heart. "Oh, baby, it's okay. It's okay," she reassured him, hesitantly stepping closer to hug her son, holding him tight, knowing she was shaking as Jeff started to sob. Fear and confusion rose in him as he hugged her, still gripping the blood-soaked razor as a million thoughts rushed through his head. "I'm sorry, Mom. I had to. I killed him." He tried to explain why he did this to himself, but his thoughts started to overwhelm him. "Don't be mad. Please don't be mad, Mom. I'm sorry. Don't be mad at me." It was almost like the guilt was too much for him, so to solve it, he raised the blade to Margaret's neck, slicing the side of it to create a deep gash as blood started pouring from the wound. His mother gasped, pushing him away as quickly as she could, clasping a hand over her neck in an attempt to stop the bleeding. Jeff stumbled back, knocking into the bare wall behind him, looking down at his mother, who knelt only to sit soon after, gasping for air as her throat started to fill with blood. Jeff was shaking, tears rolling down his face as he watched her bleed out, pulling his attention towards his father, who had rushed over to see what was going on. Viewing the horrific sight, he didn't stay to console Jeff. He saw his wife dying and some psycho killer wielding a razor blade. He wasn't that stupid. So in an attempt to save himself and his younger son, he ran for his room, deciding right then and there that he wasn't going to let Jeff kill his entire family. His father stumbled to the side of the bed, digging through the drawer of the nightstand and pulling out the lockbox with the 4-digit code. With shaking hands, his father unlocked and opened the box, revealing a handgun and a couple of rings and necklaces, some cash, family photos, and a knife that had J. Woods carved into the side of the handle. The knife was a gift handed to Peter from his long-gone father, Joshua Woods. With the gun, Peter checked to ensure it was loaded, and it was only 5 shots. He had to make them count, but was he really going to shoot his own son? Jeff stood in the doorway to his parents' room, the lights of the bathroom faintly showing off his new look, even shining off the blood-stained razor in his hand. Peter aimed the gun, standing his ground as he tried to find the words. You did this, okay? You killed her, he yelled, trying to understand how Jeff was such a monster, a killer who needed to be put down. Jeff didn't want to die, at least not at the hands of his father, or more so the gun. So Jeff dashed into the room, his ears ringing as Peter shot in his direction, missing as the bullet pierced the bed that Jeff had jumped onto. With his new elevation, he lunged down at his father, tracking him to the ground as the two fought for a moment. Peter shot once again, and once again missed, but before he could try again, Jeff had sliced his arm with the razor, making him release the firearm. Jeff took the opportunity to grab it, setting it against his father's chest as he pointed the gun down at his face, his hands shaking as his fingers laid across the trigger. "Don't be mad, Dad. I have to do this. You guys are really mad at me," he sobbed, pulling the trigger, watching through tears as the bullets passed through his father's skull, killing him within a second. Lou had heard everything. How could he not? In some desperate attempt at hiding, he locked the bedroom door and curled up at the foot of his bed, on the floor behind some old clothes. Jeff's footsteps could be heard inching closer to the door. Even the door handle jiggled, but it wouldn't open, much to Jeff's annoyance. "Lou, please, open up, please, before Mom and Dad wake up," Jeff pleaded, but Lou wasn't giving in, terrified for his life, of the brother he once trusted. Jeff, now armed with the half-empty gun and the knife he found in his father's lockbox, banged at the door for Lou to open up. "Please, I don't want to get in trouble," Jeff cried, resorting to shooting at the door, which worked in unlocking it, or at least creating a hole for Jeff to reach in to unlock it. Now with the door open, Jeff quickly entered, dropping the gun on the floor as he scanned the room for his brother. "Lou," Jeff called, finally seeing his little brother hiding from him. Lou saw Jeff's new look, and it sent shivers down his spine, convincing himself that he was looking into the eyes of a devil, but for a moment, until he realized that the thing was indeed his brother. Jeff shook in fear, rubbing his face with his free hand, smearing blood everywhere as he spat out whatever liquid occupied his mouth. "Lou, get in bed, please. It's late. It's bedtime," Jeff informed, begging Lou to get into bed. Lou had no choice in the matter, knowing that he couldn't run and hiding wasn't an option, so he played along. "Okay, Jeff, I'll go to sleep," he stuttered, rising to his feet and rounding to his bed, carefully getting in to satisfy his mentally distraught brother. Pulling the blanket over him, Lou looked up at Jeff with a forced smile. Now you go to bed. We can talk about it in the morning," he reassured him as Jeff slowly cried, unable to blink away his tears, even if he tried. But Mom and Dad will find out what I did." "They will. I'm scared, Lou, I'm scared." Jeff expressed how fearful he was of his dead parents, standing over Lou's bedside, knife still in hand. They won't be mad, Jeff. I'll talk to them, okay? Lou swallowed down his fear, but Jeff just couldn't understand what was happening, what he had done. Just go to sleep, Lou. Please, just go to sleep. Please, 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 Lou. I'm sorry. Just sleep. Jeff broke down, slicing the knife across Lou's chest, causing the boy to scream out in pain, but Jeff didn't stop. Slice after slice, even a few stabs were inflicted on the poor boy, as Lou's cries echoed through Jeff's mind. The only thing that made Jeff stop was the soft whimper he heard from his brother, begging out, "Jeff, please!" Only then did Jeff realize what he had done, and without another word, Jeff took off down the hall. He was terrified of what the family might say to him, might do to him when they woke up from their forever nap. But this was all in his head. His parents would never wake up, but he continued to flee, even running out of the house and disappearing into the night, needing to get as far away as possible. Lou was left bleeding out on the bed, shivering from the coldness of death as the warm blood blanketed his shaking body. But he wouldn't give up. Lou wouldn't die. And just like that, our stories have come to an end. Thank you for joining me today on Cozy Horror. Your camaraderie and your friendship means the world to me, and I'm glad to share my home and my cozy tales with you every day. Until next time our paths cross, this is Dr. Plague, wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.